1. What I'd like to talk about now is actually the biology of hunger, and this kind of goes along with motivation. I want you to know the brain parts that start and stop hunger, as well as I want you to know what insulin and glucagon do. So here in the middle, it says onset, glucose levels are low. They are detected by the hypothalamus, but there's a very specific part of the hypothalamus that I want you to know. That is, it's the lateral, L-A-T-E-R-A-L, the lateral hypothalamus that starts hunger by monitoring glucose levels in your blood. Here at the bottom it says CCK is what turns off hunger, but we haven't gotten there yet. We're still turning on hunger. Now, this is not the same thing as appetite. You have hunger and you have appetite. Appetite is your desire to eat. You see something that you think, oh wow, that would really be tasty about now. But hunger is you're lightheaded, you feel kind of sick. If you don't eat, that you will feel bad. Your body will start looking for protein elsewhere. And if you know a little bit about bulimia and anorexia, well, not so much bulimia, but anorexia, is your body will start to break down your muscles in order to get to the protein that's stored there. All right, so what is insulin and what is glucagon? Your lateral hypothalamus has triggered hunger. You are now eating. You know that most of the food that you eat is actually broken down into simple sugars, right? So what does insulin do? It's created by the pancreas, and it stores food energy, or in this particular case, we're really talking about storing sugar energy. Well, now, what is diabetes, right? What does it mean to be diabetic? You don't make enough insulin. So what does that mean for your body? What that means is you are not storing enough sugar energy. So when you think about what would the body type be for someone who's diabetic, and you might think, oh, heavy, they'd be heavy. No, that's actually a different kind of diabetes. If you're not storing any food energy, you would probably be fairly thin because your body can't store any food energy. It's all leaving your body much too quickly. So that is, your body would look elsewhere for food energy. So that's what it means to be diabetic. Someone who is very heavy and diabetic, if you think of someone who has a very, like a broken pancreas, it's not making very much, but the person eats a lot of sugars, a lot of starchy kind of foods. What happens is if you think about that little pancreas as a little engine that's not working very well, if you run it too hard, that engine, in my example, will break. What happens then is that you overuse the pancreas and it stops working. Why did it stop working? Because the person's diet was very high in starch and sugars. So in some cases, a person is very heavy once they lose a lot of weight, and it's not really the weight, it's their diet. They are not abusing the pancreas anymore, that they can become undiabetic. They can go back to relatively normal, although I would have to say that probably a person in that particular scenario would probably have to be very careful with their diet later on. So, insulin is working correctly. It stores all of this sugar, starch, food energy. Have you ever heard, I don't know that they use it very often anymore, but heard of the idea of a thing called a second wind? Oh, I've caught my second wind. Now, this is not the same thing as a runner's high. That's I've kind of forgotten it, but that's the body's natural endorphins, the body's natural painkiller. Glucagon. So let's say that you haven't eaten. You're starving, but you just maybe food isn't available. You have to wait, or you're making yourself wait to eat. And then finally, maybe hours later, when you finally get to the point where you can eat, you think to yourself, gosh, I don't really feel that hungry now. Why would that be? That's what glucagon is. Glucagon gets sugar energy back out of your fat cells and then puts it back into the blood so that your body can use it. So insulin and glucagon are very important to balancing your body when either you're not eating correctly, that is not eating enough, or when you are eating correctly. So your second win is you get a sugar purge from your fat cells. Now here's something that's kind of interesting. Let's talk for a moment about liposuction. A person may have a little belly, or maybe fat in their thighs, or somewhere that they don't like. So they go and get liposuction. Well, what happens is that they make a little incision, and then they use basically a big vacuum cleaner, and they suck out the fat. The fat is between the layer of muscle and the layer of skin. So it's not inside the muscle, but in between. They suck that out, and then you have to wear a compression bandage because the outer skin has to rebond to the, I guess I'd say, the subcutaneous level, that is the level below the skin, so that they stick together so you don't have loose, floppy skin. Well, probably doing it once is not that big a deal, but what happens to the fat cells that are left? The body, if you look up the definition for set point, your body, quote unquote, knows what weight you should be. So when your body loses fat cells because they were ripped out of you, the fat cells that are left will expand. So they get bigger in order to make up the lost fat cells that you had removed. Well, let's say that you just end up, because a person who goes for liposuction is not likely to modify their diet very well, or at least not for very long. They have liposuction done again. Well, believe it or not, the body goes, well, what's going on here? I know I had fat stored here and somebody keeps stealing it. And what will happen is the body will store fat somewhere else. You may end up with fat on the bottom of your arms next to the armpit. You may end up with fat in your legs somewhere, not necessarily around the butt or the thigh, but somewhere else. Or if you didn't have a belly, you may have belly fat now. So liposuction and the BioFreeze, not the muscle relaxer called BioFreeze, but it's called fat sculpting, I think. They are not a good alternative to changing your diet or increasing your physical activity. At the very bottom of the screen, type 1 diabetes, you have to have insulin injections. You would think type 2 would be the worst one, but type 1 is the one where you don't make any insulin really at all. And in order to have a normal life, you actually have to have an insulin pump or insulin injections. Type 2 is the kind that people who become obese might get, or that I think you can be born with a congenital type 2 diabetes. So this is the last part. How does eating behavior end? Right? So the lateral hypothalamus triggered hunger. You have receptors in your stomach, sugar receptors in your it's stretching receptors in your stomach, and sugar receptors in the small intestine, the first, I think, 6 inches or so of the small intestine. That releases a chemical called CCK, which is on the very beginning of this PowerPoint. CCK is not a neurotransmitter. It's not go directly to your brain. It goes into the bloodstream and it circulates and eventually gets to the brain. So you may have heard the idea is you should eat slowly. Why? Because of digestion in the stomach? No, because once the stomach has expanded, it takes a while for CCK to get to the brain. So if you've ever, let's say during a special occasion when there was a lot of food around, and you ate and finally you're like, oh man, I ate too much. Well, that means you ate too quickly and you ate too much. It's the ventromedial hypothalamus that senses CCK. And that's what finally turns eating behavior off. Now remember, we're talking about hunger and not appetite. Could you be full and continue to eat? And of course, the answer is yes. Yes, you can.